So, Pam,
Yes.
you began your career at a really interesting time. How did you end up becoming an environmental scientist in the early 1970s?
I mean, I was just interested in science and looking at the stars and rocks and all the things that were unusual for a little girl growing up in the 40s and the 50s, really. And I stuck with that through college. Majored in zoology at UConn, and then went on to graduate school and with a focus on really marine biology up at the University of New Hampshire. So, and that's where I was in the mid to late 60s. I was in graduate school getting a master's degree in a PhD program after I got my master's degree. And during the 60s, it was a really turbulent time, a lot of social activism. Lots of things were going on. Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, women's rights, reproductive rights, and from all the social change and social activism, really the environmental industry evolved from that in the later 60s, and I became more and more interested in the environmental. I was an environmental activist really in the 60s when I was in college, and I was doing a lot of reading from many of the scientists, mainly ecologists and biologists, who also had become so activists in terms of being very concerned about the environment.
Tell us what it was like in those days if you were an environmental activist.
Well, I'll tell you when we get to Earth Day, because I was heavily involved in Earth Day when I was in graduate school. But reading Rachel Carson, for example. I mean, she worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and she wrote some books on the Rocky Shore, and then she wrote Silent Spring. Barry Commoner, he felt that all of the the environmental issues and that were occurring were part of the whole social activism and social issues that we had as a country and as a world. And then some people felt population control was the answer. But if you just looked around you in the 60s or you read the newspapers, there were these major disasters like the Santa Barbara oil spill. Orange smoke was coming out of stacks. Waters weren't fishable, swimmable. And wetlands were just being filled in. They were considered wastelands. And so I just started gravitating over towards more towards environmental issues. And in 1970 was the first Earth Day, and I participated with a whole group of people at UNH in that. And that was a nationwide teach-in. And Gaylord Nelson, who was a U.S. Senator, I think from Wisconsin, he's the person that really spearheaded that. He wanted to bring attention to all the environmental issues that we had, and in most of the major U.S. cities and all the colleges and universities. I mean, people got out and they basically had teach-ins. And at UNH, I was part of that group. And then really concurrent with that, we had a slideshow. I knew some teachers, elementary school teachers. We brought the slideshow to kids. And it was, orange smoke coming out of stacks and green water coming out of discharges and garbage, like appliances in the wetlands, which a lot of our old landfills were wetlands at one point in time. And so the kids got to see a short slideshow, like first and second graders, and then the teachers would have them draw. They'd give them crayons and big poster paper, and they could draw what they saw, and they would post it all around, taped on the walls all around the room. So, and that made an impression on me. And the kids were like, "Whoa!" I figured, well, this is, I think, where my interest in environmental education for youth comes from. We reached them with just those few slides, and they they would talk about what they drew and why they drew it and all this stuff. So and then soon after that, in early '71, well, in '70, actually, Don Normandeau, the founder of this company, Normandeau Associates, had formed this company, and it was a little tiny company over here. It wasn't in this office that we're sitting in, but it was in a nearby office, and he had formed this small company. It was based on really a bunch of ecologists and biologists focused on environmental impact assessment. And I knew a couple of people that worked here. There weren't very many people that worked for Normandeau Associates at the time, and I talked to them. They had been graduate students, and I came over and talked with Don Normandeau, and he hired me. Nothing like long. They weren't like real positions or stuff like that. He said, "Well, we are we're a little busy right now. And we do need some help, and you look like you're really qualified, and so if we'll give you the job if that's."
So you left graduate school to take that job. What motivated you to do that?
To leave graduate school?
Yeah, and to take this particular job.
My interest, I thought that would, I was looking for something where I could make really a positive difference, maybe in the world, and I was thinking, well, this might be it, this is really just in its beginning stages, but it might be something where I could really use my life to be in this.
So you made that leap of faith, and now, 50 years later, you're still here at Normandeau.
Here I am, yeah.
That's a remarkable achievement nowadays to stay with one company for that long. Can you tell us how do you think that happened?
Well, this company it was always a company that was really, I think, and I could be a little biased here, but it was recognized as a pretty excellent company, a very excellent company for what we did for the sciences, and for the biologists and ecologists that we had on staff, and for the work that we did. So it wasn't. So that was one reason that I already worked for one of the best companies that I thought existed. Maybe there was something on Washington State, but I didn't. I hadn't been out there, and so. So I think that was really important. And then the other thing is, I'm somebody that really, I like challenges and change and opportunities and all this stuff. But the company, I sort of stayed with the same company, but the next layer around me kept changing because Don Normandeau sold us more than once while we were, while I worked here, and he sold us. And the business got very competitive in the 80s, and he sold us to Bank Building Corporation, which built banks out of St. Louis, and they were trying to diversify, and that didn't really last very long. But that was the first time he sold us, and then a couple of years later he bought us back, because then they decided, I guess they fired the president that they had hired to diversify, and they went back to building banks, and Don had the first option to buy us back. But it was during that period that I was actually asked to come up to Bedford and help out.
Can I stop you and ask you what had you been doing before then? Your personal trajectory through the company.
Well, before that, I had been. I was hired as a biologist, ecologist, mainly a marine biologist, and so I was doing. It was a little tiny company. I was the only woman in the company, except for secretary, and so I did whatever needed to be done. I grew up with three brothers, and a father who was adventuresome. He'd been a fighter pilot in World War II in the Pacific, and so he expected his kids to do everything and not be afraid of anything. So I just, okay, I'll drive the boat. Okay, I'll go out and jump in the mud flats, and it was fun. But I was a biologist, and I was happy doing that. And as hot a day or as cold a day it was, it didn't bother me at all. And in that whole time that I did that, about 10 years, I only wrecked one lower unit on a boat engine was
Congratulations. That's quite an accomplishment. How did you start to get into the management end of things?
I got into the management end of things while I was still a marine biologist, and I took over management of the marine biology lab that we had in Portsmouth. And I was doing project management at that time too. And so being me, I said, well, we've been initially, when we first got into the field, I don't think any of the scientists from academic training, including myself, really, there wasn't a lot of guidance yet from the regulatory agencies in '71 as to how to do these things. So we were academics trying to figure out, what really worked in the real world and what didn't work. But then after a few years, we had more guidance, and there were a lot of smart scientists. But I'm thinking, geez, here we are, we're managing clients, I'm managing people, I'm managing projects, and I don't really have any management training or business training. So I started taking business courses up at the University of New Hampshire, at the Whittemore School. And so that's what really got me into more management and in the company, because I ended up being a scientist with a master's degree and a couple of years into a PhD, plus formal business training. And I was doing that mainly so that I could do the job that I was doing at the lab, so I could do it better. I wasn't really looking, I didn't have my sights on anything, as vice president of the company or anything like that.
But it all happened eventually.
Well, it happened quickly after that. But in '84, after Don Normandeau had bought the company back, then I was made the vice president of the company, vice president of operations. And I sort of knew at that point in time that I probably would not be going back to my days of operating boats and doing samples and writing reports and coming up with data and that sort of thing. So in '84, I was the vice president. Don Normandeau owned the company again. And then he was a little bit risk averse in certain ways, and the business was really competitive. And so then he put us up for sale again in '86. And a number of companies talked to us, a number of engineering firms. There was a lot of interest in the company, but he sold us to Thermo Electron Corporation, a Massachusetts company. And they're now Thermo Fisher Scientific, and they had decided, since they had a big environmental instruments division, that they were going to get into environmental services, and we were one of the first companies that they bought, and so they bought us in '87, and then in January of '88 they made me the president of the company.
Can you tell me a little, or can you tell all of us a little bit about what impact that had on you personally and on the company itself? It was a huge change, I'm sure.
It was a really huge change for the company and for the employees, but it was mostly really very, very positive. And to me personally, it was a lot of work, and there was some stress and a lot of travel involved, things like that. But they invested a lot of money in us. We had been a small family-owned company prior to that, so that and so there wasn't a lot of cash to buy new vehicles or to invest in computer systems. Or we did some of that, but Thermo basically invested in us whatever we needed to have replaced, and our benefits ended up being much better, and so overall I think it was really positive for the company, and it was very, very positive for me. I got that's where that was real life business, working, and they owned us for 13 years, so working for at that point it was a Fortune 500 publicly traded Fortune 500 company, and I got to do a lot of things in addition to running Normandeau Associates, and they were very entrepreneurial type company, and they encouraged their presidents that were that really showed that they knew what they were doing and that they met their goals. They encouraged us to to grow and to acquire other companies in our business area and stuff like that. So I learned a lot about. I looked at a lot of companies, and we bought some companies while we were owned by them that became part of Normandeau Associates. I think I had an advantage over many of the companies, many of the smaller engineering firms that they bought, and that it was really unusual to have somebody with a technical background, but also business skills. Plus, I had been running the company as the vice president. Essentially, Don Normandeau owned us, but I'd been running it for a couple of years. So I knew what I was doing, but I learned a lot more working for Thermo.
So yet again, an example of how you've stayed with Normandeau, but Normandeau changed.
Normandeau kept changing. There's just always opportunity. If it had not changed, I would have been bored to death and I would have left. No question. Or form my own company. I mean, I had thought about doing that a few times. Starting up a company. I'm sort of entrepreneurial myself, so.
Well, in fact, the next chapter of Normandeau involved the employees buying the company back from Thermo. So in a way, maybe you did fulfill that entrepreneurial dream. Can you tell us a little bit about that chapter?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the end, my dream was to buy this company. But when Don Normandeau owned us, I didn't know how to do it. Number one, it takes a certain set of skills that I learned while I was part of Thermo to figure out how to do such a thing. Plus, I had I had the formal business training, so I knew about different types of ownership structures and organizational structures and things like that. And I had always thought that these professional services companies, where the people are the assets, they don't have a lot of other equipment or machinery. The people are the assets, that they should own a piece of the company. They should be able to have some shares in the company. And most employees can't afford to buy shares, even if they happen to be something that they could buy. And a lot of companies they say they're employee owned, but if they're owned by 6 employees who have been invited to be part of the company, and they buy into companies. And that isn't something that we could have ever done.
What exactly? It's called an ESOP. Can you tell us more about that? And
yeah, so I had known about ESOP companies. There weren't very many of them at the time, but ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. And it's a ERISA qualified, tax qualified retirement plan is what it is. I mean, we have a Fidelity retirement plan, a matching plan, but this is a retirement plan where it's the securities of the company that's held in the retirement plan. Each of the employees has an account in that ESOP trust, and so I did what was called a leveraged ESOP, and essentially put the company that we were buying as the collateral for the ESOP, and hired a consultant that knew about ESOPs, and also had an attorney and banks that knew a bank that knew about ESOPs, and they were really for this. They thought this was a great idea. And then some 23 of the managers of the company, including myself, put in some money, because we had to have some skin in the game. I felt confident. I mean, I learned how to buy companies from working for Thermo. So they held a very small minority interest in us to start, which helped us. We had banks pounding on our door. They were interested in loaning us the money, So we did it that way, and so the ESOP initially owned 62% of the company, not a small amount, it was majority ownership. And then over the next 12 years, we paid Thermo for their shares, and then we bought out the managers with the common shares, so it became 100% ESOP. And our shares are distributed out to employees every year, based on 50% of it's based on compensation. So I'm one of the highest paid people in the company, and so I would get more shares than somebody that may be a technician. But the other 50% is based on years of service, because we really value that. So that technician, if that technician had been here as long as I have been here, would get the same number of shares that I would. So it's widely distributed. Nobody gets really rich with this, but everybody has a piece of the shares in the company, ownership in the company. And then when they retire, they get the value of those shares over 5 years.
What do you think has been the benefit of that? What difference do you think that's made in how the company has succeeded or performed over the years since 2000 when you did this?
I think, well, when I first did it, it was like, I mean, we've been through so many different, we've been bought and sold, and then, okay, now the company's for sale again, and so now I'm buying the company and leading this effort and making it employee-owned. It's like, okay, now what are we doing, Pam, But, so it took a few years, but employees started getting, every year they get a sort of a certificate that says how many shares they have and the value of the shares, and so they understand, what we're. After a couple of years, they understood what we were doing, and they had a piece of the company. So they consider it their company, and I think it helps certainly with the client service and the work that we do, and keeping expenses down in a way. I mean, we don't spend a lot of money on anything. I mean, there are no company cars or anything like that in this company. It's the employee's company. It's not mine. So, but if we need new equipment to do our work better, that's a good expense. So, and we have an ESOP advisory committee, which people from all of our different offices are part of that, and they do a lot of the work now with volunteerism. We put out an internal company calendar with all the photos that people take. Our employees are really good photographers, and they do a number of different things, and informational sessions and that sort of stuff, because it's their company.
Pam, obviously employee ownership was very important to you. What are some of the other key or core guiding principles that you've tried to guide the company by over your 30 years of leadership?
One of the key things is I've always tried to keep this a specialty science-based company, doing really good science and not trying to be all things to all people. Over my years in the business, I've seen so many companies, not the little tiny 4 or 5 person companies, but the ones that are trying to grow, maybe the 20-person companies, starting to be, a mile wide and an inch deep in terms of their services. And they see something, and oh yeah, we'll do that. And so they'll hire one person to do that, and I tried to focus the company on the sciences and the ecology and the fisheries biology. Now we're getting into certainly a lot of work with bats and birds because of all the renewable energy, the wind projects that we do. But that's within our mission, in our specialty. I mean, it's not that we've just been a bunch of fisheries biologists and that's all we're going to do. We're always adjusting the business to meet the market needs. And when we look at acquisitions, I've made 2 acquisitions, I think, since we've owned the company. One was a company in Gainesville that was focused on wind energy. And I did that back in 2011 or 2012 because I saw that was certainly a market that would be growing, and that was needed for energy production. So staying specialized and being 10 people deep or 20 people deep in certain specialties is what we have done. Another one that we've always focused on is ethics and integrity, and that's really it's important for any company is really key for us. I think we're respected by regulators and by clients and by other stakeholders because we try to really be extremely ethical and be upfront with, okay, this is how this has to be addressed, and this is approximately what it will take to permit this project, for example. And we certainly lost projects because we haven't been low price. We've also, a couple years after losing those projects, we get them because they circle back because whatever happened, it wasn't sufficient to get a project permitted properly. Mm-hmm. So that's key with us. And there's nothing. We're not like an engineering company say a civil engineering company that design is a big piece of their revenue. The engineering design is really key to them. To us, it's the permitting and doing the right studies up front. And
it's good science.
Yeah, and if we didn't do that, then we wouldn't have a business. I mean, if we were careless or whatever, or didn't do good science, we wouldn't have such a good reputation. Profit and cash flow are key. And you would be surprised the number of scientists and engineers who don't really know where the paycheck comes from sometimes. That we need to get paid, and we need to be profitable. And that's also how that's what if you do that, then you can grow the company, you can acquire other companies, you can just add more staff and get more capabilities. But if you're not a profitable company, or you don't collect your receivables, you can't do the things that you need to do. So I've always focused on that. And then, of course, the employee ownership, embracing that, and embracing corporate social responsibility. We have a lot of core values in the company, and a lot of them are now. I mean, we had those before there was corporate social responsibility, but that's really what a lot of them are.
Let's talk a little bit more about the corporate social responsibility. I mean, it seems clear that one of the company's core values is volunteerism and civic engagement, and that you've been the main driver in that. Why is that so important for you personally and for the company's sake?
I just think that every person is responsible for doing good, and for contributing something to society or to the world, and so volunteerism and civic engagement is important to me. It's something that I've always done. I've done a lot of it as part of the company. I've done a lot of it as just as an individual. When I was young, and in high school and early college, which is sometimes referred to as the Kennedy generation, do something for your country, or do something. So it's me wanting to do good or help your neighbor or volunteer your time or whatever. And then when I became the leader of the company, even really before that was passed down to the company. Any company that I would ever run, I would want that to be one of the values.
You've described your personal commitment, but why is it important for a company to do that?
Because corporations are some of the most powerful entities in the world, and again, I believe that they need to do good. I mean, they need to make profits, but they need to do good, and volunteerism and civic engagement is just one piece of that. You look at it, people, planet, profits. That's sort of what I expect of companies. In Normandeau Associates, we did a survey a few years ago. It's just a simple: do you volunteer, and how much do you volunteer? What do you do? And a lot of people do outside activities where they volunteer. A lot of people do things that the company does, but about 70% of our employees said that they volunteer time, and that's a pretty good number, really.
That's a fabulous number.
Yeah.
What kind of things do people do?
Well, some of them volunteer in their church. I mean, it's boys, the Scouts. We volunteer. We do food drives where everybody brings in food for the food pantry. We support the local animal shelter here every year. Yeah, it could be a number of different types of organizations. I'm trying to think of the employee. We also support the United Way Day of Caring. People go out in teams and whatever needs to be done. That's another company initiative. But I currently am still on three boards, so to speak. And one is a land trust, the Southeast Land Trust. I'm the vice chair or vice president of the board, and they're really right now expanding and building a facility out for the community for environmental education. It'll be the offices for the land trust, and it's on a piece of property that's over 100 acres. I really enjoy being on that board. I like to be on boards where I can really help, I guess, where my nonprofit experience and my business experience can help make that organization even more successful. So,
and your range of board activity has really been phenomenal. You were a founding member of the New Hampshire chapter of the Nature Conservancy. You stayed with that organization for 17 years, including time as the chair and the vice chair. And then you've had gubernatorial appointments too. I mean, Volunteer New Hampshire is one of your gubernatorial appointments. That doesn't sound like something that would fit into your natural science background.
No.
What interested you about that?
Well, I've always had, again, even going back to the 60s, I've always been interested in a variety of things, including just helping people. So Volunteer New Hampshire basically is the state office for all the AmeriCorps grants that come into the state. So you're focused on kids at risk and families in need and substance abuse and so AmeriCorps money comes in and pays a minimal amount to people that want to be in the AmeriCorps programs to go out into the communities and help communities with that request different assistance, for example. I guess going back to Barry Commodore, who thought that in the 60s that the environmental activism and whatever was part of all of the societal things that were happening. To me it fits. It's something.
Of course, it fits, or you wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
You've obviously led a life of service, both to the company and to the community. Let me come back to the company for a minute, because you didn't just build the company, you're leaving a legacy for the company. And part of that always involves a leadership transition. And I know you've been working on that for a while, that you've given it a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that, what the process was, where you're at with it?
Yeah, I guess I'd start off by saying that there's the leadership transition, but over the last 10 years, most of the people, I was one of the early people with this company, but a lot of people joined in the late 70s, early 80s, and so there's been a transition of all of those people, because most of them have retired. I'm sitting here, but all my friends left. No, they retired. No. So I've been focused really on the whole thing over the last 10 years, and then with and that's gone very well. Our people, a lot of them are sort of like me. They didn't just say, okay, I'm retiring next month and bye. Well, they have shares in the ESOP, and they own part of this company, and so they want to help and maybe work part-time and spend a couple of years training whoever's going to replace them, no matter what level of the company you're talking about. So, and then at the top level, the people that were reporting to me for 10 years ago or 20 years ago, whatever, they were retiring. They weren't really interested in taking over the company. And so I hired some people and brought them into the company 10, 11 years ago. And Bob Varney is one of the people that I hired. And I knew Bob when he was the New Hampshire DES commissioner. I knew him for years. And then he went on to become the Region 1 EPA administrator. Within a few months after that, Kurt Talkin, who had been with the Army Corps in Boston, Kurt was a district commander, and neither of them had business experience. So really, they had much more regulatory experience and permitting experience than anyone in this company. But my role was to really train them more in business. So we ended up with some big projects where they were very involved, but that was good in a lot of ways because they learned a lot about the consulting business from being involved in those projects. So in January, before COVID, we made the decision that we would make Kurt the CEO. The board did. He would be the next CEO. So he became the CEO in March, and I'm still working with him on a lot of stuff. But he is running the company, and prior to that, he was the chief operating officer for several years. So he moved right into that position. And Bob is the president, and so Bob is more involved with regulatory issues and permitting and strategic issues. He now reports to Kurt. And they worked together years ago, and their jobs are very different. So Bob became the president in 2015 because that's when I became the board chair, because our board chair retired, and so then I became the board chair and the CEO in 15. In December, just a few months ago, I decided not to run for the board of directors again for another 3-year term and have one of the younger people open up a spot for one of the younger people to come on the board, and to have one of our outside directors, because we have inside directors and outside directors. One of our outside directors is the new board chair, and I'm working with him, and that was, I told him I would stay around for a while, certainly, and help him learn the board chair and the agendas and all of that stuff. So I'm working with him too. So we're really done in a formal sense, and I'm just working with Kurt in the new board chair. And then I'm also one of the trustees of the ESOP Trust.
Clearly, you're not going to slow down very much, even if other people, you've successfully transitioned leadership. Let me ask you a different type of question.
Okay.
We were both women. I was in law. You were in environmental science. At a time when there weren't many women around. But now, what would your advice be to a woman who told you that they wanted to become an environmental scientist or go into the environmental consulting industry?
I think it's a wonderful profession to be in. If you have a passion for this type of work, and the need is certainly there, and it's urgent, as it's always been. But I would say just go for it. Get a really good foundation of courses while you're in college, if you're still in college. Some of the markets or needs or disciplines change over time. If you're interested in more of the business end of the company, I have a good technical background, and then at least take some business courses. Nowadays, it's much more prevalent to have maybe a CFO running a company, or to have people that are senior level managers who also have business degrees. Back in the 70s, I was like an outcast. In fact, the company wouldn't pay for any of my business courses. They didn't think it was relevant. I just thought it was needed. Well, when somebody tells me I can't do something and I think I need to do it, it just makes me. I'll just go. I'll make sure that I do it. Then
Is that like waving a red flag in front of a bull?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So back to advice to our young budding women environmental candidates.
It's not a 9 to 5 job. The clients sort of rule, or attorneys like Mary, she wants something, so you have to be prepared to sometimes have it impact maybe your personal plans or your life. I would say it's just take on the challenges, take on whatever comes along, and there are opportunities, and don't have. It's not really a fear of failure, but I see so many people hesitate to do things that I think they can do, or maybe do with a little mentoring, because they're afraid that they won't do it right. But if you're like that, then you never really reach your potential, and you don't even know what your potential is, and you don't get to do other even bigger opportunities. So I just go for it. That's what I always. I'm just like that. So, okay, I'll do that. Yeah, I mean that's what I always did. Yeah. I just step in. I'd see something. Oh, that needs to be done. I'm going to do that. So.
It's a great philosophy.
Yeah.
And one of your other mantras, I think, has always been not to take credit for things, to share the credit with your team. So I'm really happy that you're getting the credit now for all the things that you've done over the course of your career.
Well, thank you.
Are there any other, anything from the perspective of, I might have told you not to do it based on my experience in the 70s, but it's different now? I mean, that compare and contrast thing that faces women today?
Well, it's fair. I mean, there's still a long ways to go, I think, or a ways to go. But I mean, the corporate culture, and it includes the environmental industry, is very different today in terms of, I guess, how it views women, or accepts women, or whatever, or tolerates women. Yeah. I mean, when I got into management, there really weren't any women, and so I was sort of a trailblazer, and I think, and you in your profession, you were a trailblazer. I mean, we worked really hard, and have gotten pretty far, but there's still a long ways to go. I mean, I remember going to a BBC management meetings, and I have to fly to St. Louis, and the culture. This was 1982 or so. They have dinner, a speaker, and then everybody would they'd probably be 100 guys in the room. I don't think you see anywhere near as much of that sort of stuff today, and there's certainly more women in management, more women in higher level positions, and more women on boards and stuff. But we're still not there. I mean, women are 50% of the population, or 51 or whatever, and so we're smart, so and we're energetic, and we can do it.
And I know you've appointed women or you've made sure women are appointed to your board. You've hired lots of women. So trailblazers like you have made a huge difference too.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't done the count, any sort of head count recently, but we used to be about 50% women in this company. Now that was even in the 80s, and that was unusual. But there were more women scientists and engineers back when I got into the field. There weren't a lot of women scientists, but there were fewer women engineers, and that. So I think it's changed, starting with the educational levels in college. More women are getting into the field, and more women are getting into the industry, and hopefully getting into the positions that they should have. So.
Let's talk about, I see you, you don't have the EBC cup here anymore. There's our EBC cup.
Right there.
Normandeau has been one of the longest members of EBC. I think the company joined shortly after the EBC was formed. And you personally have been on the board for for 25 years before you stepped down last year. Many of those years were treasurer. What has the EBC meant to you? What do you think it's meant to the industry?
Oh, the EBC, when it was founded in 1990, it was, I think, the first nonprofit organization in the U.S. focused on the environmental industry. So we joined early on, and there were a couple of other events that were environmental related in New England. One was the environmental conference at Tufts that Nancy Anderson always ran. That was more for the public sector and regulators and nonprofits and whatever. But I always went to that. I always attended it. And then the environmental expo that Dan Moon and Russ Ryan, that multi-day event with the exhibits and the speakers and the papers and everything. But that was all that we had here in New England. So the EBC was really the key organization, and it I joined it early on, and then in '95 I was asked to join the board. It was a small board, and we were owned by Thermo Electrons. It was just a small startup industry with not a big budget. And it, like all startup, unless there's a big benefactor or something like that, it struggles for a while. So I started just keeping my eye on the financials, and then at some point, because it needed to be done, really. And then at some point, I was made treasurer. I don't even know when. And then I did do that for a long time, at least 20 years, and it's in really, really good shape now, but it's an excellent organization for anybody in the environmental business. And now it's environment and energy. It's great for networking. It's great for meeting friends. That's where you and I met 100,000 years ago.
It seems that way, yeah.
For keeping up to date on regulations and issues, for meeting regulators. The Boston chapter is mostly Massachusetts speakers and things like that. But in 2001 to 2005, I worked with Dan Moon, who's been the president and executive director for a long time. I helped even set up the financials so that we could track some numbers. Set up chapters in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Hampshire so that we could tackle state issues and stuff. So and have programs that were specific to a state. So I think that's worked very well. And New Hampshire's chapter is doing really well. Bob Varney is actually the chair of the New Hampshire chapter. I mean, I just consider myself one of the luckiest people because I'm somebody where where my personal interests in nature and the environment and people and whatever just mesh so well with what I've done with my career. So, I mean, they sort of just come together like this. Yeah. And some people consider that bad, that you can't you can't draw the line and this is, your personal life. But I've been lucky to have been able to do that and to have that whole environmental industry be right there when I was sort of ready to take it on, to be part of it. So.
It's been a great time. Yeah. It's been a great ride. Yeah. And to be there from the beginning up till now has just been
You're the same. Really special. Really, you're very, I mean, you're a little younger than I am, but you got into the environmental business early in your career, right? So.
Well, we miss having you at our board meetings very, very much. But as always, you have left the EBC in good shape, just as you're ensuring that Normandeau will be in good shape. And I have to say that the conversations that we've had leading up to our conversation today have just been fabulous. I mean, you and I have, as you say, we've been friends for a long time, but I've gotten to know so much more about you and appreciated so much more your thoughtfulness about your career path, how driven you are to keep learning, your spirit of giving back, your professional pride, your care about your community, your employees. And that's the reason why, on behalf of the EBC, I just can't tell you how pleased we are to be able to recognize your brilliant career with this Lifetime Achievement Award.
Well, thank you, Mary. Thank you.